What do you think is happening inside your body right now when you don't eat? Most people picture a familiar scene: a growling stomach, dropping energy, stubborn fat that refuses to burn, and a brain screaming for sugar, caffeine, or something to comfort it. But that picture is incomplete, because beneath the sensation of hunger, something far more interesting is taking place. When food stops coming in, your body does not panic, does not collapse, and does not immediately start eating muscle as the usual warnings suggest. Instead, it pauses and turns inward. In that moment of pause, one of your most powerful biological systems quietly switches on a system not designed for weight loss, but for survival, repair, and renewal. That system is called autophagy, and whether you realize it or not, it has been keeping you alive for decades. Autophagy literally means self-eating, which sounds frightening until you understand what is being eaten. Not healthy tissue, not vital organs, and not muscle when fasting is done properly. What gets consumed is waste. Damaged proteins, faulty cellular components, old, inefficient mitochondria, and the biological debris that accumulates inside cells every day. You can think of autophagy like quality control in a factory. When food is constantly abundant, the body stays busy producing, storing, and digesting, leaving little time for cleanup. But when food disappears, production slows and maintenance becomes the priority. That is not weakness, it is biological intelligence. Few people realize that the human body did not evolve in a world of 3 meals a day, snacks, and midnight calories. It evolved in uncertainty. Some days there was food, some days there wasn't. And in those gaps, the body learned a critical survival lesson that if nothing new is coming in, you must take excellent care of what you already have. Autophagy is the biological expression of that lesson. It is not starvation, it is strategy. In fact, this mechanism is so important that in 2016, Japanese scientist Yoshinori Ohsumi received the Nobel Prize for discovering how autophagy works. By starving yeast cells under a microscope, he observed that they did not die. They cleaned house. Small sacs formed inside the cells, wrapped around damaged components, and recycled them to generate energy and rebuild. Not destruction, but recycling. And your body does the very same thing. However, a major misunderstanding needs to be clarified. Autophagy does not switch on the moment you skip a meal. Skipping lunch is not a magic button, and eating a lighter dinner does not automatically put you into repair mode, because the body operates in sequence and first uses what is most readily available. In the first few hours after you stop eating, your body still runs on glucose in the blood and glycogen stored in the liver. Insulin is still present, digestion is not finished, and the cleanup crew is still waiting. So at this stage, you may feel hungry, but biologically, nothing special is happening, yet this is simply a transition. Somewhere after about 12 hours, a shift occurs. Insulin drops low enough for the body to receive a clear signal that nothing new is coming in, and priorities begin to change. Cellular sensors such as AMPK and sirtuins pathways, directly linked to longevity and metabolic health, are activated. But autophagy has not yet fully surged. It awakens very quietly, like a maintenance crew starting the night shift. No fireworks, no alarms. But inside the cell, damaged components are identified, tagged, and prepared for recycling. This is the bridge between burning fuel and repairing the machine. Around 16 hours, the process becomes truly meaningful. Not dramatic, not flashy, but real. Autophagy begins active cleanup, dealing with faulty proteins, inefficient enzymes, and mitochondria that no longer produce energy well. They no longer belong in a healthy system, so the body breaks them down not to waste them, but to reuse the materials. This is why some people feel mentally clearer when fasting, not because fasting is a miracle, but because energy is no longer being spent on digestion and inflammation. It is redirected, and, for the first time in a long while, the internal environment becomes quieter. On the outside, you may feel normal, or slightly hungry, or a bit tired, or nothing at all, but inside something profound is happening. You are not starving your body, you are giving it space to repair. And that difference changes everything. Most people think improving health must come with intense sensations, sweat, pain, struggle, but biological repair is usually silent, like a wound healing, DNA being fixed, or cells regenerating while you sleep. Autophagy does not announce itself. It simply works. And when the body remains in this intentional, controlled state long enough, repair goes deeper. Still, this is a critically important point, and where many conversations about fasting go off track. More is not always better. Autophagy is powerful because it is intelligent, but push it too far, and the signal changes. Repair turns into stress. Maintenance turns into survival. That boundary matters. And understanding it, not chasing extremes, is the difference between strategic fasting and biological harm. So if you have ever wondered whether you are harming your body by not eating, whether fasting is dangerous, or whether hunger is a sign of damage, the answer lies in context, because hunger is not always an emergency. Sometimes it is an invitation for the body to do what it was designed to do: clean up, repair, and renew before the next meal arrives. And when you understand that, fasting stops being discipline and becomes cooperation with your own biology. When fasting passes the 16-hour mark, a subtle but critically important shift begins to occur. The body stops asking, "Where is the next meal?" and starts saying, "All right, go deeper." This is the point where fasting is no longer just fuel management and becomes structural repair. Around 24 hours, autophagy is no longer cleaning the surface but reorganizing the system. And one of the most important upgrades at this stage involves the mitochondria, the tiny power plants inside your cells. Not all mitochondria are the same. Some are young, efficient, and resilient, while others are old, damaged, and leak energy like weak batteries. When you eat constantly, the body tolerates this inefficiency because fuel is always available. But during fasting, inefficiency becomes costly, so the body does the intelligent thing and replaces faulty infrastructure. This process is called mitophagy, the cleanup of damaged mitochondria, and it matters far more than most people realize. Because mitochondrial health affects not only energy, but also inflammation, insulin sensitivity, brain function, and how you age. As mitophagy increases, cells become more efficient, quieter, and cleaner. This is not a trendy detox. This is biology. At the same time, something else quietly unfolds. The immune system begins to reset. Immune cells that have been overworked for years start to be replaced, not through destruction, but through regeneration. Research suggests that prolonged fasting can stimulate the production of new white blood cells, partially renewing the immune system, like replacing an exhausted security team with one that is more alert and precise, not to achieve immortality, but to reduce noise and improve efficiency. Many people misunderstand this phase, assuming that feelings of fatigue, coldness, or slight weakness means something is wrong, but that is not always the case. Very often, it is simply a phase shift, as the body transitions from a system based on constant intake to one based on stored energy and efficiency, and transitions are rarely comfortable. Much like learning a new skill, changing time zones, or adapting to a new climate. Discomfort does not equal damage. It means adaptation is underway. As you approach 36 hours, autophagy reaches its peak. This is when cellular cleanup and repair are most active, provided the fast is intentional, controlled, and properly supported. Growth hormone rises sharply, in some cases up to 5 times baseline, and this quiet protective hormone helps preserve muscle, burn fat, repair tissue, and slow aging. This is why the fear that fasting causes muscle loss is often exaggerated. The body does not destroy what is expensive. Muscle is protected, especially when growth hormone is high and insulin is low. What is lost first is not muscle, but water, inflammation, excess glycogen, and metabolic noise. Many people describe this phase as feeling lighter, not only physically, but mentally. Thoughts slow down, cravings lose urgency, and focus becomes steadier, not euphoric, but clear. This clarity does not come from deprivation, but from reduced noise. When digestion no longer consumes resources, when insulin stops swinging, and when inflammation settles, the nervous system finally gets room to breathe. However, this is also the stage that requires the greatest restraint, because beyond this point, the signal can change. If fasting goes on too long without sufficient minerals, rest, and intention, cortisol rises, stress hormones take over, and the internal message shifts from "we are repairing" to "we are depleting." This is where fasting turns into starvation, and starvation is not intelligent. It breaks down muscle, weakens immunity, disrupts hormones, and causes long-term metabolic harm. The difference lies not just in the number of hours, but in context, whether fasting is chosen or forced, supported or chaotic, temporary or prolonged, because autophagy is repair, while starvation is panic. This distinction is crucial, because many people fear fasting for the wrong reasons, or pursue it for the wrong motives. Fasting is not a competition, not an endurance challenge, and not a moral badge. It is a biological tool, and the most powerful tools always require the correct dose. The insight many people miss is that you do not need to fast constantly to benefit, nor do you need extreme protocols, because autophagy works in rhythms, not heroic marathons. Consistent 16-hour fasts, occasional 24-hour fasts, with adequate recovery time. That is how repair accumulates, not through suffering, but through consistency. Every day, the body produces cellular waste. If you never give it time to clean up, that waste accumulates and eventually shows up as fatigue, brain fog, chronic inflammation, and accelerated aging. Autophagy is the body's waste disposal system, but it only operates when you stop adding more. And the deeper truth is that fasting is not just about food, it is about space. Space for repair, for recalibration, for biology to remember what it is capable of. In a world of constant eating, constant stimulation, and constant consumption, fasting is one of the few intentional silences we have, and in that silence, healing occurs. When people talk about fasting, they often focus only on short-term outcomes, like weight loss, fat burning, or a flatter stomach. But that is just the surface. The deeper story is how fasting changes the trajectory of your health, because autophagy does not merely clear today's waste, it shapes how you age. Every cell in your body has a lifespan, and over time, proteins misfold, mitochondria lose efficiency, and DNA accumulates small errors. That is normal, but the rate at which those errors build up, and whether they are repaired or not, determines whether you age quickly or slowly. Autophagy is one of the very few systems capable of slowing that process. When damaged components are removed and replaced, cells not only live longer, but function better. That is why animal studies show that fasting does not make them immortal, but helps them age more healthfully, with fewer diseases, better metabolism, and greater stress resilience. Longevity is not just about living longer, it is about extending functional life. Chronic inflammation is another silent driver of aging, and many modern diseases, such as diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and Alzheimer's, share a common root in long-term, low-grade inflammation. Fasting interrupts this loop because when insulin drops and digestion pauses, inflammatory signaling decreases. Cells stop shouting at each other, and the immune system shifts from constant defense to maintenance. This is why many people notice less joint stiffness, reduced bloating, and calmer skin, not cosmetic changes, but the release of internal pressure. Then there is the brain, where fasting surprises people the most. When digestion stops, energy is redistributed, blood flow patterns change, neurotransmitters become more balanced, and BDNF increases, often called fertilizer for the brain, supporting learning, memory, and emotional regulation. As a result, many people experience mental clarity while fasting, not a tense or stimulated focus, but a quiet sharpness. Fewer scattered thoughts, softer emotional reactivity, and a shift from reflex to response. In a world of constant stimulation, this state has become almost unfamiliar. Fasting also trains psychological resilience. Each time a craving arises and you do not immediately obey it, you learn that discomfort is temporary, that hunger rises and falls, and that you do not have to act on every internal signal. This is not willpower, but a recalibration of your relationship with sensation. And over time, it carries into other areas of life. Stress feels more manageable, emotional triggers lose urgency, and a space opens between impulse and action. That space is power. Still, fasting does not mean withdrawing from food culture or skipping family meals, nor does it mean ignoring hunger indefinitely. Strategic fasting must coexist with real life through simple adjustments, like eating breakfast later, finishing dinner earlier, or occasionally taking a reset day. The goal is not perfection, but rhythm. Biology thrives on cycles: eating and resting, tension and recovery, intake and absence. When there is only constant intake, systems degrade. Fasting restores contrast, allowing the system to become sensitive again. The real question is, what would change if food were no longer the solution to every discomfort? If hunger were no longer an emergency, but a signal, if not eating occasionally were an act of self-respect rather than punishment? When the fear of hunger dissolves, reactive eating stops, and intentional eating begins, and that changes everything. The paradox is that your body already knows how to fast. It remembers. It is simply rarely allowed to do so in modern life, where there is constant intake, stimulation, and busyness. Autophagy has not disappeared. It has just been denied the opportunity to work. And when you create even brief space, biology responds quietly, efficiently, and faithfully. This is not a journey of pushing limits, but of restoring dialogue between you and your body, knowing when to advance, when to pause, and trusting that this system is far more resilient than you were ever taught. Because health is not built only by adding more. Sometimes it is built through intentional subtraction. And when you stop filling every gap with food, noise, and stimulation, you may realize that your body has been working silently on your behalf all along. And finally, let this conversation end with responsibility rather than hype. Fasting is not for everyone, and it is not something to rush into blindly. If you are pregnant, underweight, taking diabetes medication, have a history of eating disorders, or are living under severe chronic stress, fasting may not be appropriate without medical supervision, and that is not weakness, it is wisdom, because biology always operates within context. But for many people, especially those who have spent years in a state of constant eating, constant stimulation, and constant urgency, fasting can become a reset, not a punishment, not a challenge, not a test of discipline, but a moment when the body is finally allowed to speak without being interrupted by the next meal, the next snack, or the next stimulus. Your body is not broken. It is adapting to excess, to noise, and to a world that never stops loading calories, information, stress, and demands. Autophagy exists because the body expects pauses, expects contrast, expects cycles between having and not having, and when those cycles disappear, function quietly declines, making fatigue, brain fog, and inflammation feel normal not because you are aging, but because the cleanup crew is never called. Intentional fasting is simply an invitation for the body to take out the trash, repair what is worn, and reorganize what is overloaded, and then to eat again. Because food is not the enemy, constant eating is. You do not need extreme protocols. You do not need suffering or obsession with numbers. Sometimes the most powerful change is simply eating breakfast later, stopping late-night eating, and allowing hunger to exist without panic listening instead of reacting. If skipping a meal scares you, if hunger feels like an emergency, if not eating immediately makes you anxious, that is not failure. It is data showing how dependent the system has become on constant intake. And data is always the first step toward freedom. At the deepest level, fasting is a story about trust. Trusting that the body can go a few hours without constant supply. Trusting that discomfort does not equal damage. Trusting that repair happens in silence. When that trust is built, you stop living reactively. Stop negotiating with cravings all day long. Stop fearing your own biology, and regain agency. If there is one thing to take with you, let it be this. Health is not built by doing more forever. It is often built by doing less, with intention, less noise, less constant intake, less fear of hunger, and more rhythm, more awareness, and more cooperation with the system that has kept you alive until now. And if this piece helps you see your body not as something to fight, but something to understand, then you have already begun. Stay curious and kind to your body, because it has been working very hard for you,